Distinguished delegates, happy Friday. I hope you all had a very enjoyable evening last night in New York. We shall now resume our work. This morning, we will resume our meeting in plenary for oral reports on the discussions held yesterday afternoon under item 5 of the agenda, entitled Consideration of the Matters to be Addressed by the Conference of the Parties to the Agreement at its first meeting and additional matters as identified by the Preparatory Commission. Afterwards, we will resume our work under item 5 of the agenda, meeting in the format of Informal Working Group 1 in this room to consider our consideration of rules of procedure for the Conference of the Parties. In parallel, Informal Working Group 3 will meet in Conference Room 2 from 10:30 a.m. to continue discussions on the operationalisation of other provisions on financial resources and mechanism. Once that work is complete, Informal Working Group 2 will reconvene to consider the modalities for the operation of the clearinghouse mechanism. Oral reports. Distinguished delegates, we will now provide brief oral reports on the discussions that took place yesterday afternoon under item 5 of the agenda. In this respect, we wish to reiterate that the oral reports are not meant to be an exhaustive and detailed summary of all of the views expressed and the proposals made, but rather to provide an idea of the topics that seem to be the focus of delegations' interventions and general trends in the discussions. The reports are, of course, without prejudice to the discussions still to be held at the PrepCom, and all options raised by delegations remain on the table. Janine.
Good morning, delegates. Welcome to the final day and looking forward to a constructive final finish. We've done really good work. I'm pleased to report on the work that was conducted yesterday in Informal Working Group 1 and Informal Working Group 3. Informal Working Group 1 concluded its consideration of the issue of arrangements to enhance cooperation with relevant legal instruments and frameworks and relevant global, regional, sub-regional, and sectoral bodies in the afternoon of 28 August. Discussions focused on the proposal by the co-chairs that the Preparatory Commission at its third session consider a draft decision providing guidance on cooperation with relevant IFBs to be forwarded to the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties for consideration and adoption. We were glad to note that delegations were broadly in favor of the proposal for the co-chairs to prepare, in the intersessional period, a draft decision to be considered at the third session of the Preparatory Commission. Delegations presented views on elements that they would like to see reflected in that draft decision, which included, among others, inclusivity, practicality, flexibility, adaptivity, efficiency, equity, and complementarity, and normative coherence of cooperative arrangements. Delegations also suggested addressing the need to ensure alignment of any cooperative arrangement with the agreement, in particular Article 5, Paragraph 2, and Article 8. The centrality of the Conference of the Parties in overseeing arrangements, the avoidance of duplication, and reciprocity and mutual support. Additional elements raised included instruments and modalities of cooperation, the level of autonomy of the Secretariat and subsidiary bodies to cooperate, levels of formality of arrangements, cost effectiveness, and optimized use of resources, clear procedures for communication and scientific and technical information exchange, and the participation of IFBs in the work and processes under the agreement. Views were also shared on the merits of developing a system for identifying and possibly prioritizing relevant IFBs, or whether self-identification by IFBs would be preferable. Some intergovernmental organizations also shared their views on the importance of establishing effective cooperation and coordination arrangements in order to achieve the objectives of the agreement as well as the objectives of the respective IFB. We want to thank delegations for their constructive engagement on this issue and the representatives of the IFBs present for sharing their experiences. Turning now to Informal Working Group 3. This working group resumed its consideration of the issue of operationalization of other provisions on financial resources and mechanism. Discussions focused on the special fund and the voluntary trust fund. Regarding the special fund, views were exchanged on the scope of work that the PrepCom could undertake towards the early operationalization of the fund as a matter of priority. In respect of action to be taken in the intersessional period leading to PrepCom 3, there appeared to be convergence on mandating the co-chairs to prepare a draft decision by the Conference of the Parties for the purpose of operationalizing the special fund. With respect to the voluntary trust fund, there was broad support for undertaking work intersessionally to identify the most appropriate ways to address any overlaps between the financial rules and any potential terms of reference for the voluntary trust fund. With regard to the way forward, we will return to the issue of the special fund this morning to confirm the envisaged way forward, as well as consider the other issues under that item that we were not able to address, namely the scale of assessed contributions and guidance on overall strategies, policies, program priorities, and eligibility for access to and utilization of financial resources. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Janine. Informal Working Group 1 continued to consider the issues of arrangements for the functioning of the Secretariat, including its seat, and the rules of procedure for the Conference of the Parties on the afternoon of 28 August. Turning to arrangements for the functioning of the Secretariat, including its seat, further to the fruitful exchanges that took place on Friday last week, based on a co-chair's working document entitled Overview of the Proposed Elements for Arrangements for the Functioning of the Secretariat, and the emerging agreement that the PrepCom would benefit from obtaining further information on a number of elements addressed therein in advance of PrepCom 3 to assist in making its recommendations to the COP. Discussions focused on the type and content of any such request for information, with some delegations putting forward proposals for further work that could be conducted intersessionally. There appeared to be broad support for a communication from the co-chairs to the Secretariat of the United Nations requesting further information on the implications of a potential linkage to the United Nations, including the impact of an appointment of the head of the BBNJ Secretariat by the Conference of the Parties on the type of linkages that may be established between the BBNJ Secretariat and the United Nations, including in terms of the applicability of the UN privileges and immunities to the head of the BBNJ Secretariat. Moving forward, the co-chairs will consult with the Secretariat on the most efficient and appropriate way to obtain the information requested by the PrepCom on the various elements discussed during this session, with a view to ensuring that the information is available sufficiently in advance of PrepCom 3. We will also reflect on other possible ways to advance the work on this issue based on the discussions held so far and bearing in mind the need to avoid duplication and ensure that the most efficient use of resources is made available. I now turn to rules of procedure. Discussions on rules of procedure for the Conference of the Parties were based on the refreshed text prepared by the co-chairs on the basis of input received during the first week of the meeting of the Preparatory Commission, which was circulated to delegations on Monday, 25 August, A/AC 296/2025, CRP3. We were very grateful for the flexibility of delegations in taking up the discussion on the rules of procedure for the conference and the parties at short notice and without interpretation. At the suggestion of the co-chair, the Informal Working Group reserved discussion on Section 9 on the conduct of business for a session that would have interpretation, and moved to consider Sections 10 to 15 on decision-making, elections, language, and audio recordings. Amendments to the rules of procedure, overriding authority of the agreement, and miscellaneous issues. The Informal Working Group will continue its consideration of the rules of procedure for the Conference of the Parties immediately following these reports, focusing on the remaining sections to be discussed, namely Section 3 on observers, Section 3 bis on relevant instruments, frameworks and bodies, and Section 9 on the conduct of business. The floor is now open for comments on the reports that Janine and I just made, bearing in mind they are not meant to be an exhaustive reflection of all of the views and proposals raised, but rather to identify the main issues that have been the focus of delegations, interventions, and the way forward. I see no one wishing to take the floor. We will now adjourn the plenary meeting to, Canada. Canada, you have the floor.
My apologies, co-chair. My brain is just very tired on a Friday morning. Could you please confirm where exactly the informal group on the operationalization of the clearinghouse mechanism is taking place? Thank you.
You reckon your brain's tired. It's taking place, as far as I know, in CR1, isn't it? It's CRA, CR2. CRB, no, 2. There you have it, point taken. All righty. We will now adjourn the plenary meeting to resume our work in the format of Informal Working Group 1 to consider rules of procedure for the Conference of the Parties under item 5 of the agenda. I think for continuity and also because delegations will need to move, we will resume both sessions this morning, both formal sessions at 10:30. Distinguished delegates, in the words of those well-known multilateral diplomats, the Black-Eyed Peas, let's get this party started. As just noted, following our discussions on this issue yesterday, the remaining sections of the refreshed text of draft rules of procedure for the Conference of the Parties for us to consider are Section 3 on observers, Section 3 bis on relevant instruments, frameworks and bodies, and Section 9 on the conduct of business. We will start with Section 3, focusing on those paragraphs where changes have been proposed. This is, however, on the understanding that any delegation is free to comment on the other paragraphs and that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. We will be conducting our work with a view to completing a full reading of the draft rules by the end of this morning's session. In this respect, I wish to emphasise that it is essential to complete this task this morning to allow us to prepare a revised draft during the intersessional period, which will provide a solid basis for advancing and ultimately concluding our work on this matter. And in that respect, I would also like to thank all delegations for their flexibility and adaptability yesterday. In effect, we ensured that that is an hour and a quarter that we spent productively yesterday that we do not need this morning. So I thank you for that. Now, before I open the floor, let me just explain that I will take for ease part 3 on observers as a whole. So to be clear, that includes both observers and also 3 bis on relevant instruments, frameworks and bodies. In other words, I will be opening the floor for the entirety of part 3, that is rule 6, 7 and 8. With that, the floor is now open. Well, that was quick. Moving on to part 9. No, the European Union, you've requested the floor. You have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning, colleagues. As a general comment, the EU and its member states recall that the principle of transparency, as articulated in Article 48 of the agreement, is a critical feature of this agreement. This principle aims to ensure that the governance elements of the agreement operate openly and enable effective accountability. Observer participation follows as a key pillar of transparency. Observer participation and broad representation of diverse stakeholders at the COP and its subsidiary bodies ensures that a wide variety of knowledge, which is often specialized and technical, is available to ensure that decisions are taken on the best available science. We also acknowledge that observers can provide a critical and necessary countervoice to that of states parties. The BBNJ agreement sets a higher and more explicit standard for transparency in Article 48(4), in that the modalities for observer participation shall not be unduly restrictive. This provision goes beyond previous international agreements, and therefore, in our view, draft text proposed on the basis of precedent from other agreements and other rules of procedures is not appropriate in the context of this agreement. Therefore, pursuant to the provisions of Article 48(4), while we here as a PrepCom are drafting rules of procedure for the COP, we are bound to facilitate observer participation in the rules, and we are bound to avoid provisions that limit the access of observers or suggest that observer participation is a privilege instead of the right that is enshrined in the treaty. For these reasons, the EU and its member states cannot support options 2 and 3 as presented in the revised draft rules of procedure. Therefore, our comments are limited to Rule 6, Option 1, the original text, We note that the term in relation to Indigenous people and local communities is followed by square brackets with the term with relevant traditional knowledge in square brackets. In our view, these square brackets should be opened and this term should be retained in order to faithfully reflect the provisions of Article 48 of the agreement. In addition, we cannot support one alt underneath the original Rule 1, in particular the listing out of the various different observer groups. And we note, just as a passing comment, that Indigenous peoples and local communities are separated and that the term with relevant traditional knowledge doesn't follow local communities. So that also is not in accordance with Article 48.4. In relation to 1 bis, we support Rule 1 bis, but the 3 options in square brackets, our preference is that objections to observer participation should have a high bar. So we prefer 2/3 of parties present objecting to an observer's participation. In Rule 7, Part 1, there's text in square brackets that such observers may upon the invitation of the President. We think this language is redundant upon the invitation of the President in light of Rule 6.1, Option 1. In Rule 7.2, similarly, we don't think that we need the introductory text unless otherwise decided by the COP. We think the sentence should start with participation of observers. And in Rule 2b, we don't think that it's necessary that they would deliver statements at the invitation of the President, given that they're already present as observers in line with Rule 6. In Rule 2 bis, we're reserving on this for the moment, but we're interested in hearing the views of other delegations. And therefore, we don't accept Option 2 or Option 3. And just moving down. And I'm sorry, Shadi, you said you want me to deal with the IFBs as well, was it? Yes.
That is correct.
So in IFBs, in Rule 8, we note in Rule 8 bis, there was a provision from one delegation to include the words to ensure, not to undermine. We don't think this faithfully reflects the text of the agreement, so we don't support that language that's in square brackets. However, we are also conscious that there's parallel discussions going on IFBs, and there's a draft decision being prepared for IFB participation that's going to be prepared intercessionally. So in that regard, we're reserving on Rule 8, 8 bis, 8 bis alt, and 8 ter until we see how those discussions progress in the parallel sessions. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the European Union, and before I give the floor to Argentina speaking on behalf of CLAM, can I just note, and I should have flagged this earlier, given the subject matter, our standard rules, while we have been going paragraph on rules of procedure, is to not take interventions from observers line by line, but rather to ask observers to hold their interventions to the end. Given the subject matter, I will, following the conclusion of all states' interventions, open the floor to observers. But if I can make a request, one, that you are very disciplined with time, and secondly, obviously, I would expect there would be a certain degree of commonality in the interventions. So to the extent that you can coordinate, I think it is too late to realistically ask for a joint statement, but to the extent that you can avoid repetition, that would be very much appreciated. But I will open the floor to you at the end of states' interventions on this. And with that, I give the floor to Argentina speaking on behalf of CLAM.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, and a very good morning, colleagues. We're making this brief intervention on behalf of CLAM pertaining to Rule 8 bis and then to paragraph 3 bis. On Rule 8 bis, on consultations with other IFBs, as we expressed in our first intervention, CLAM believes that this rule is not necessary since it is already taken up in the text of the agreement. As pertains to the proposal to include this new paragraph 3 bis, for the same reasons, we believe that this paragraph and its rules are redundant since it reiterates the text of the agreement and it is not strictly procedural. and that's why we would suggest removing it. Furthermore, as pertains to the second article, Rule 8.3, we believe that its content would be covered by the rules that we'll establish under the title Observers. Those are Clam's comments for this section. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Muchas gracias, Argentina, speaking on behalf of CLAM, and I give the floor to Morocco, speaking on behalf of the Africa Group.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and good morning to everyone. Morocco will speak on behalf of the African Group on Section 3. The African Group supports a categorization that is consistent with Article 48, Paragraph 4 of the agreement, ensuring participation of all the groups identified therein. These categories are A, non-party states, B, United Nations entities, C, intergovernmental organizations, and D, other stakeholders, including indigenous people and local communities, the scientific and academic community, and civil society organizations. We also emphasize the importance of a transparent accreditation process based on consensus or the absence of objections. Applications should be submitted at least 30 days in advance of the session, and the consolidated list should be circulated and made public in due time. On the different options before us, we believe option 1 is too open-ended and mixes categories. Option 2, which is more detailed, addresses a number of concerns and is still under review within the group. Option 3, inspired by the ECOSOC practice, could represent a workable balance. At this stage, the group is open to refining option 2 and 3, but we do not favor option 1. Finally, we consider that observer status may be granted on a sessional or standing basis, subject to periodic review with the possibility of revocation in cases of misconduct. Turning to Section 3 bis, on Rule 8 bis, the African Group is in favor of Rule 8 bis. We believe it should state that the Conference of the Parties shall make arrangements for cooperation with relevant IFBs, not that it may. It reflects the clear mandate of the agreement. We also stress the importance of including explicit language that such cooperation must not undermine those bodies. In terms of operationalization, we see value in anchoring this cooperation through regular reporting back to the conference under the standing agenda item already envisaged. On Rule 8 ter, with regard, the African Group raises questions as its substance appears to be already covered under the general provisions on observer. We therefore seek clarification on its added value and necessity. I'll stop here, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Morocco. Apologies, I can't actually see who's in the chair for Singapore, but on the basis that you're intervening on behalf of AOSIS, you have the floor. Oh, I can see Nathaniel now. My apologies. You've obviously put your head back up. Singapore, on behalf of AOSIS, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Good morning, colleagues. On the issue of observer participation, AOSIS is open to discussing options 2 and 3. The broad by default approach that is set out in option 1, in our view, may not strike a balance between transparency, inclusivity, prudent use of limited time and resources, and efficient and effective functioning of the BBNJ bodies. Procedures along the lines of those outlined in options 2 and 3, in our view, would not be unduly restrictive and would allow us to achieve a high degree of transparency. That said, we see value in including Rule 6, paragraphs 1 alt and 2 under option 1 as a standalone rule at the start of section 3 on observers. Turning to Rule 8 bis and 8 bis alt, AOSIS is of the view that the proposed rules 8 bis and 8 bis alt are not appropriate for inclusion in the rules of procedure. These proposals are not procedure rules. They reflect a mandate granted to the Conference of the Parties under the agreement. As for the proposed Rule 8 ter, we would welcome views as to whether observer status for IFBs are already addressed in the various options for Rule 6 and 7. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore speaking on behalf of AOSIS. And I give the floor to the Federated States of Micronesia, speaking on behalf of PCIDS. Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. So we're finally talking about observers. So a few points along the text. First of all, in regards to Rule 6, we see that one alt is reflected in option 1. We do like that provision very much because we were the ones who actually proposed it. In general terms, yes, we do like observers, and I would like to demonstrate that. Trying to figure out how many I can fit. So we do like that part of actually option 1. In regards to Rule 7, we were also the ones that proposed 2 bis. And wherever we land, we would like to have something like this one reflected. Now moving down. My apologies, I'm scrolling through. On 8 bis, we would have a similar remark. We certainly do not like and to ensure not to undermine. But generally speaking, this doesn't look like something that would be in rules of procedure. It looks more like something you might find in terms of reference. It is also something that is already in the agreement. In that case, it is redundant. The worst case scenario is that we might, and the African group just alluded to that, if we start tweaking, then we might actually be not faithful to the agreement. So we could probably do without 8 bis and its variations. Thank you very much.
I thank the Federated States of Micronesia and note that if we were playing poker, I would be in a lot of trouble right now. And I give the floor to the Russian Federation to be followed by Japan and Korea. Russia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Turning now to the part on observers. Once more, I'd like to voice our approach. As my distinguished colleague from Morocco noted, the agreement says who can participate in this process. But, as you see, our process is under the auspices of the UN. And accordingly, as I've already noted on several occasions, the provisions of the UN Charter are predominant over any other international agreements. In that regard, we need to take into consideration the provisions of the Charter, which systematically draw a distinction between the participation of states and the participation of other organizations. That includes NGOs. So, in accordance with Chapter 33 of the Charter, it says that any member of the organization that is not a Security Council member can participate without a right of a vote in the discussion of any matter conferred to the Security Council. In all instances when the Security Council thinks that the interests of that non-member of the UN are concerned. There's a similar provision in Article 16.9 when ECOSOC can invite any non-member of the UN to participate without a right of a vote. As for the participation of other observers, then there's a certain relationship established with them. There's Article 71, which is the only article on participation by NGOs. I'm referring to the UN Charter here. the Economic and Social Council is authorized to carry out due measures for consultation. In that regard, again, I'd like to point out the need for a clear distinction to be drawn and to use UN practice here. I'm repeating myself here, but there are processes. We have an intergovernmental process. And of course, it would be useful to consider the opinions of various entities. But it's important to bear in mind that the main decision is that this process should be mainly facilitated by cooperation of states. In that regard, there is a practice where NGOs are not permitted in various bodies, or they can participate as observers in the UN system. So we need to be guided primarily by the provisions of the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank the Russian Federation and I give the floor to Japan to be followed by Korea. Ohayo gozaimasu, Japan. Dozo.
Ohayo gozaimasu, co-chair. As for Section 3, Japan wishes to give further consideration to these three options, so we reserve the right to comment at a later stage. And on 3bis, we support the proposal to add this new separate section on IFBs, and the rule 8bis now should be moved to this new section 3bis. Thank you.
Domo arigato gozaimasu. I give the floor to Korea to be followed by Greece and the Philippines. Korea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Korea would like to share its views on Rule 6. Currently, there are 3 options under discussion. We do not support options 2 and 3 for the following reasons. First, options 2 and 3 provide that the participation of other entities, including non-governmental organizations, would be decided through a non-objection procedure. In practice, this means that the objection of a single party could prevent participation. We consider this approach would not be consistent with Article 48 of the agreement, which is intended to promote transparency and to ensure that observer participation is not unduly restricted. Second, from a practical point of view, options 2 and 3 would require the conference of the parties to consider and decide on requests for observer participation from intergovernmental organizations and NGOs. However, given that the COP will meet only once every 1 or 2 years, and probably for a very limited time of 1 or 2 weeks, it would not be an efficient use of the COP's limited time to consider individual observer applications. Third, options 2 and 3 allow NGOs and other entities to make oral statements, but do not allow them to submit written views. In our view, written inputs are often a practical means for parties to understand the perspectives of observers. This would make it harder, not easier, for parties to understand their perspectives. For this reason, we do not support options 2 and 3 and instead support option 1. Moreover, given that observer participation can promote transparency and diversity of perspectives, we believe that unnecessary restrictions on observer participation are not desirable. Therefore, we propose deleting Rule 6, paragraph 1bis in option 1. Thank you, Co-Chair.
I thank you very much, Korea. I do not give the floor to Greece. Thanks for the confirmation that Grexit has not started as of today. And so I give the floor to the Philippines, followed by Iran and Iceland. Philippines, you have the floor. Mabuhay.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Good morning, fellow delegates. The Philippines wishes to briefly reconvey our comments and inputs on Section 3 on observers. On Rule 6, we express preference to proceed on the basis of Option 1, the non-objection element, which allows for the possibility of a single state vetoing on the participation of an NGO in Options 2 and 3, seem contrary to the spirit of Article 48 of the agreement. We would also prefer to work on the basis of a streamlined process consistent with current international practice. We also find value in making surgical revisions to Rule 7 to allow for its application to observer participation in subsidiary bodies unless otherwise decided by a majority vote. And we understand that finding a compromise on this majority, as well as other aspects of this rule, could be by way of a dedicated small group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippines. I give the floor to Iran to be followed by Iceland and China.
Thank you so much, Mr. Co-Chair. On Rule 6, as mentioned by the African group and the AOSIS group, we believe option 3 might be a better option, and we support option 3 for that reason that the legal status of different entities are being distinguished, and this is not to prejudice the contributions of observers, but to follow the practice that has already been in many other rules of procedures of treaties. And we do not think that option 3 is unduly restrictive. Same considerations apply for Rule 7. On the Rule 6, notwithstanding that we do not support option 1, we see that there is a footnote in the rules of procedure defining related organizations, which includes International Atomic Energy Agency, the International Criminal Court, the International Organization for Migration, ISA, ITLOS, Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the Preparatory Commission for Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, and World Trade Organization. We're not in favor of defining what sort of organizations might fall within the category of related organizations as we see it right now. We believe that if we want to approach this topic, we need to have a informed decision and discussion on this matter, and then we would decide collectively to see if we need a list or not, and what kind of organization could be relevant in this regard. On Rule 8, we do not think it's relevant to the rules of procedure. It's mostly substantive because it touches upon the regular consultations on coherence, cooperation, and coordination with other relevant legal instruments and frameworks. This is actually part of the provision of the agreement. I don't think we need to replicate that here. And in addition, we are already in discussion of the cooperation with other relevant instruments, and I think that's a different topic in this PrepCom. And for this reason, we're not in favor of having Rule 8 bis and Rule 8 bis alt, Rule 8 ter. Just a small consideration on Rule 8 on notification by the Secretariat. The reference to the term "those that have informed the Secretariat of their wish to be represented," it's vague for us. I think we need to have discussion, if not possible in this PrepCom, maybe next PrepCom, to what procedure should be followed for informing the Secretariat for the observers, of course, pending the final decision on the ways and means of participation of observers, which I already mentioned. We support option 3. And I'm not sure, Mr. Kutcher, if we yesterday in the other room we also touched upon languages and also the amendment to the rules of procedure. If we covered that, I would like to have a couple of points in that regard, given the fact that they were parallel meetings. I was not able to reflect my delegation's views on that part, and I'll try to be very, very brief. Thank you so much. On the languages, on the section on languages and audio recordings, Rule 57, paragraph 2. It states that a representative, a party, may speak in a language other than an official language if the party provides for interpretation into one official language. We would like to replace party with the state because sometimes signatories might also be would like to may have the preference to provide for interpretation in their own language. So we should not restrict the scope of states. For that reason, we propose deleting the term party and replace it with state. That would be read in this format: a representative of a state may speak in a language other than an official language if that state provides for interpretation into one official language. And as with practice of many other relevant rules of procedure, we would like to also add this language to be to the end of paragraph 2 as follows: interpretation into the other languages of the conference by the interpreters of the Secretariat may be based on the interpretation given in the first such language. I repeat our proposal: interpretation into the other languages of the conference by the interpreters of the Secretariat may be based on the interpretation given in the first such language. This is actually a standard language derived from rules of procedure of the ONCAC Conference of Parties and ONTAC Conference of Parties, and I believe it makes clear how this should be proceeded in actual situation. On Rule 59, we believe that we need to add the term official before meetings of the conference regarding audio and video recordings of the meetings to not put undue burden on the Secretariat to have recording of informal meetings as well. On the amendment, we would like to emphasize that where the rules of procedure is being adopted, is going to be adopted by consensus, then we also need to amend that by consensus. That is the way that we follow, and for that reason, we prefer the option that focuses only on consensus, not present and voting. Thank you so much for your patience.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iran, and before I pass to Iceland with his patience, I would just like to make two announcements. Firstly, St Kitts and Nevis has just submitted its instrument of ratification. That brings us to 55 ratifications, 54 states and the European Union, and I think it is appropriate that we have a round of applause to congratulate St Kitts and Nevis. And that just made our work even more urgent and important this morning, delegates. I would also like to tell the room that CR2 has switched to considering the clearinghouse mechanism now. In other words, there is no small group on the clearinghouse mechanism. It is being considered on the floor in CR2. And with that, thank you for your patience, Iceland. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. That latest ratification announcement made my heart beat a little bit faster, as we're very much racing with our implementation processes as well. So we'll try to keep our intervention concise so that we can get back to work on that. First, on observers, we've made our point before here. So just to say that we continue to support option 1 as being a faithful reflection of Article 48 of the agreement, and we do not support Rule 6(1) bis in that regard. Then on the matter of IFBs, we think it's important to approach this question by thinking of the difference in the function of an observer as a stakeholder who is contributing into the BBNJ processes, and then the function of an IFB, which is someone who the agreement foresees as an avenue for the implementation of BBNJ action. And we think that this distinction gives reason for having a dedicated section in the rules of procedure that is dedicated to IFBs and the agreement's interaction with them. And that is the reason why we have proposed, among others, Section 3 bis. And we think it is appropriate in Rule 8 ter in that section to guarantee IFB participation and to have that located in the section. And we note that there is interplay between that rule and then the observer section, in the sense that the observer section elaborates the participatory rights that attach to observers. Then on Rule 8 bis or Rule 8 alt, which either formulation would be in that Section 3 bis, we take the point from CLAM and AOSIS that the wording of this provision is perhaps not sufficiently procedural, and we express that we are open to cooperating on alterations that would infuse it with more action, noting the interlinkages with our IFB discussion there and the outcome. Thank you.
Tak, Iceland, and I will give the floor to China, to be followed by El Salvador, Switzerland, Argentina, and New Zealand. Ni hao, China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Regarding observers, currently there are 3 options in Rule 6. China would like to reiterate its position. We cannot accept option 1. We support option 2. In addition, regarding option 3, we are open to this option and we are willing to conduct further negotiations and discussions. Regarding China's position, before we have presented our position on this question, I would not like to repeat. Just now I listened to the statements by delegations. I would like to emphasize the following 4 points. First, regarding transparency. Transparency is a very good word. It exists in Article 48, Para 4. We also support the transparency in the operation of the agreement based on the provisions of Article 48. We welcome the contribution of observers to the full and effective operation of the agreement. However, at any time, we cannot interpret transparency as unconditional participation. There should be substantive and procedural requirement for the participation of observers in the meetings of the agreement. This is in line with the international practice. Second, regarding the non-objection procedure, just now I heard some concerns raised by some delegations. I think those concerns are unwarranted. For instance, the UN Ocean Conference, in accordance with relevant rules of the UNGA, adopts this non-objection procedure. But in practice, every session of the UN conference had been a great success. In June this year in Nice, the 3rd UN Ocean Conference was convened. I was also lucky enough to participate in the conference. According to our French colleagues, the total number of participants to the UN Ocean Conference in Nice exceeded 30,000. So it is really wide representation. I've not heard any comments of the concerns of the inability to participate in the UN Ocean Conference. It was very widely represented and participated, and it was based on the non-objection procedure. Thirdly, we believe that the rules of procedure of the COP should not only include the participation of the observers into the COP meetings, but also their participation in the meetings of the subsidiary bodies. There has to be general guidance for that. Regarding their participation in the meetings of the subsidiary bodies, they can be specified in the rules of procedure of the subsidiary bodies. But the general rule should be outlined by the COP. So in option 2, there are some principles. Fourth, we note that in our prior discussions, some delegations raised that indigenous people should be included as a separate category and to define their respective application procedures and rights. Some delegations have also stated that organizations enjoying ECOSOC consultative status should be subject to less stringent requirements for their participation as observers in BBNJ meetings. We highly value these views and proposals, and we are ready to discuss them with the parties concerned constructively with a view to reach consensus and to further improve the texts. Co-chair, with your permission, I would like to talk about IFB. First of all, we support in the rules of procedure of COP to include relevant provisions on IFB. It is not necessary to do that, because in the rules of procedure, to include provisions on IFB works to regulate the operation of the BBNJ agreement in future. However, regarding the drafting of the provisions, we agree with the previous delegations that considering that with the guidance of the co-chairs, we are gonna draft some draft decisions in the intersessional period. We should wait for that to discuss how to reflect the provisions in the rules of procedures of the COP. We would like to reserve our right to raise further proposals on this topic in future. Thank you, Co-Chair.
China, and I give the floor to El Salvador, to be followed by Switzerland, Argentina, New Zealand, and Thailand. You have the floor, El Salvador.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. This morning, my delegation wishes to make an intervention in our national capacity. And given that this is the first time that I'm taking the floor, I'd like to thank you, the co-chairs, and the Secretariat for the tireless work that you've been undertaken and for the excellent stewardship of our debates. The delegation of El Salvador has always expressed that the rules of procedure must strengthen the role of observers, above all the role of states. We believe that option 2 is the most favourable for us. However, we do have some concerns and some queries as to paragraph 1, where we refer to states that are not party to the agreement. My delegation would understand by this signatory and non-signatory states. On paragraph 2, my delegation would like to request some clarification on the participation of states in a capacity of observer. In the list of member states of the UN, those on the list of member states of the UN should be able to participate without making a formal request. On paragraph 3, Roman 3, the delegation of El Salvador believes that states in their capacity of observers must make a statement to the president directly as member states of the UN in terms of the hierarchy. We would be very grateful for some clarification on the consultation mechanism with the board at the effects of an invitation by the president. There are precedents in where states who are not party can make statements after the state's parties have made their statements. That could be an alternative. We must also recall that this instrument was negotiated by member states of the UN. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Muchas gracias, El Salvador, and I give the floor to Switzerland, to be followed by Argentina and New Zealand.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Switzerland is through the group presented by Costa Rica on their behalf and on behalf of the Philippines and Switzerland in voicing a clear position that for transparency reason, but not only for transparency reason, Switzerland is a landlocked country. We don't have any administrative unit that is good in oceanic science. So observers from science, from NGOs, are very important to support us and to help us to prepare our positions. And therefore, Switzerland, like the EU, Korea, and the Philippines, are clearly in favor of option 1, to allow observers to participate and to share their knowledge with us. We also have a lot of sympathies with the proposal by Iceland that the IFBs need a special status. As I had the opportunity also already to share that within the cooperation mechanism among biodiversity-related conventions, it is clear that we only can have their buy-in if they have a clear status, a clear position, a clear right to actively participate. Otherwise, IFBs will just turn the back and say, well, we don't want to be coordinated by you. So we have to understand that this is a complex mechanism, and we have to give them a special status so that we then can discuss, work together on cooperation, on MOUs, and whatever is needed to structure this cooperation. So Switzerland supports this amendment proposed by Iceland, and we think it is really very relevant. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Switzerland, and I give the floor to Argentina in your national capacity. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Indeed, as you just said, we are making this statement in our national capacity. First of all, Mr. Co-Chair, we'd like to underscore that as a principle, Argentina supports the participation of observers in line with the provisions of the agreement in its Article 48. As we expressed in our previous statement, Argentina believes that when it comes to this, we should include a mechanism that preserves as the ultimate requirement the non-objection criteria from member states that guarantees the need for consensus. As other delegations that took the floor before us have said, we believe that the fact that the meetings of the agreement are open to observers does not mean unconditional participation from these participants or these observers. We had proposed in our previous statement, following some modalities like the ones adopted for the United Nations Conference on the Oceans Conference, whose rules of procedure and modalities are contained in document A/Res/78/128 that distinguishes between those organizations that have an advisory status before ECOSOC and those that do not. And to those, a non-objection criteria would be applied. Now, currently we have three different options. Argentina wishes to underscore its support to option number 2, which is the one that we believe most faithfully reflects what was our original position. It is a text that's been extracted from a convention that 193 member states are parties to, like the UN Convention on Transnational Crime. So it's a text that has already been taken up in other conventions of a universal nature. So that is our position. And of course, we're open to discussing texts or refining the text under option 2 in line with some of the concerns that have been voiced in the room, such as the concern raised by our colleague from the delegation of El Salvador. We also understand that when it says states who are not parties, where it says states not party to the agreement, that it includes those who have signed or not, so states who have not manifested their intention to be party to the agreement. And then we'd like to make a clarification on different arguments that delegations have used to advocate for option 1 that for us is unacceptable due to how open it is and due to the fact that it doesn't have any type of control over it. And the fact is that several delegations have expressed that option 1 is the one that reflects the spirit of Article 48, or the one that is in line with Article 48, or that most faithfully reflects Article 48 of the agreement. Now, we'd like to underscore that this is an interpretation by this group of countries. That's their interpretation, and it's a partial interpretation of the text of the agreement. Because if we read the text of the agreement, paragraph 2 of Article 48 says that the meetings of the Conference of the Parties and its subsidiary bodies shall be open to observers. So in this regard, this is in line with the interpretation of those delegations. So thus far it is, but they've admitted a second part under this paragraph that says that they will participate pursuant to the rules of procedure. So in the rules, we can establish procedural rules and standards that would regulate exactly how they would participate and to the extent to which the participation of observers in meetings would be implemented in practice. Another clarification in the same regard, in paragraph 4 of Article 48, it says towards the end that when it comes to the representatives of states that are not parties, indigenous groups, scientific community, civil society, towards the end it says that the rules of procedure of the COP shall establish the modalities for this participation. And they've also admitted to recall this part of the article that says shall not be unduly restrictive in this regard. So the letter of the article itself is providing for the possibility of there being some type of restriction in place in order to ensure transparency. And the only requirement, the only condition in the letter of the agreement is that it should not be unduly restrictive. So all of that is to say that the alternative in option 2 that just establishes an objection mechanism for one of the categories that are listed there precisely complies with the requirements of the agreement, that is not being unduly restrictive. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Muchas gracias, mi amigo. Delegations, just to give you a sense of the state of play, I've currently got 9 speakers inscribed still to come on this item. New Zealand, Thailand, the United Kingdom, Norway, India, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Nicaragua, and the Russian Federation requesting the floor for a second time. I've then got UNODC, and I've got 3 NGOs, NGO 15, 9, and 11, and apologies, I do have the names, High Seas Alliance, ICEL, and the International Indian Treaty Council. A couple of requests. Oh, and I've now got Oman and Jamaica. I really do want to be able to get part 9 onto the floor this morning, for which we have a strict 1 p.m. cutoff. There are some strong views on this part. I think it is very important that it be considered on the floor before we go to our intercessional period. I would ask all speakers to be disciplined. I would particularly ask speakers who are taking the floor for a second time to be very disciplined and to respond precisely to something they have previously heard in the debate. The exception, of course, is those who are speaking for regional groups who then obviously take the floor in their national capacity. I would ask that the observers who have asked to speak, maybe if you can coordinate internally and try and ensure that there is a minimum of repetition between the 3 interventions, that would be very much appreciated. And with that, I say, kia ora, New Zealand, you have the floor.
Kia ora, Co-Chair, tēnā koutou katoa. I will be brief on this item following your request. I would just say that listening to the discussion this morning, I've heard that there have been lots of references to existing practice of the United Nations or other conventions, specific rules that have been adopted pursuant to other conventions. Of course, we are here to agree the rules of procedure for the agreement. And the agreement, of course, includes specific direction about participation and specific direction in terms of the rules of procedure. And that's in Article 48. So I think that it's wholly inappropriate to simply take the talking points that we may bring in other contexts into this context. I'm heartened to hear from the previous speaker that Article 48 has been carefully read, and it is good to know that delegations are doing that, although there are clearly differences of views about what Article 48 clearly requires. In New Zealand's view, Article 48 is quite clearly a provision which is intended to promote the widest possible participation by stakeholders and other groups with an interest in the work of the COP. In that respect, looking at the options that are in front of us, option 1 appears to us to be the only option which would be consistent with that intent and with Article 48. I would say as well that we've heard this morning that option 1 is an attempt to have sort of unfettered participation by observers. I think that's not the case. Clearly looking at the rules of procedure and the article, it is of course possible and within the mandate of the rules of procedure to prescribe modalities for that participation. And I certainly haven't heard any arguments that such participation should be open and without any modalities. So I would just observe that some of the options before us don't even provide that. For example, stakeholders with an interest in matters pertaining to the conference of parties may request to participate if they don't meet some other category that's prescribed for in some of the options. For example, option 3 and 1 alt and option 1. To us, that leaves a clear gap between what the rules of procedure would be providing for in the agreement, and that is not appropriate. So I will leave my comments on that there. In terms of IFBs, New Zealand was and is a co-proponent of Section 3 bis, and I would associate New Zealand with the comments that were made by Iceland in that respect. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, New Zealand. Ngā mihi. And I give the floor to Thailand, Sawadi Kap.
Sawadee krap. Good morning, Mr. Co-Chair. Thailand attaches great importance to the principle of transparency as stipulated in Article 48 that has been read out in this room. Transparency is a cornerstone of fostering trust, inclusiveness, and legitimacy of the work of the Conference of the Parties and its subsidiary bodies concerning the BBNJ, our global common. So on Section 3, concerning observers, at this stage, we prefer to proceed with option 3 with different sub-rules for different types of observers. That said, we believe the rules should enable broad and meaningful participation of observers while maintaining an efficient decision-making process. In this regard, Thailand sees merit in a clear and facilitative accreditation process for non-governmental organizations and other relevant entities, one that avoids undue restrictions or procedures that may limit participation, contrary to the spirit of Article 48. In particular, modalities based on no objection would risk allowing a single delegation to block participation and would not be conducive to inclusivity or transparency. That would be unduly restrictive in our view. We are open to listen to different options on this issue in the future debate. We would also support provisions that allow accredited observers not only to attend meetings, but also to submit views in writing and, where appropriate, to deliver statements. This element will help ensure transparency in our proceeding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Kopkun Cup, Thailand, and I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. The UK supports the EU, Korea, New Zealand and others' comments on the need for transparency, the importance of observers, the strength and specificity of the wording of Article 48, and the need to faithfully give effect to that article. As such, we cannot support options 2 and 3, and we support option 1. In Rule 6, we prefer the original text at paragraph 1 rather than paragraph 1 alt. The original text reflects the language at Article 48 of the treaty, and the square brackets in that subparagraph should be lifted. In respect of Rule 6, 1 bis, we would support a 2/3 majority. On Rule 7, again, we prefer the original language, though, like others, we query what the purpose of the bracketed text in the first line of Rule 7.1 is required for, given that we have procedures at Rule 6, and we note we also have Rule 35 and 36 on procedures for speaking and precedence. And the same goes in that regard for Rule 7.2b. We would delete the bracketed wording there. And in Rule 7.2 in the chapeau, we'd remove the words unless otherwise decided by the COP. Rule 8, we think is fine, but we suggest that the language needs tweaking to reflect the terminology used in Rule 6 and 7. So a suggestion would be the Secretariat shall notify those entitled to be represented and those that have informed the Secretariat of their wish to participate as observers. Section 3 bis, we are content with the additions of Rule 8 bis alt and 8 ter, and that would be our preference. As others have said, though, we do note the interplay with discussions on this and the draft decision that will be taken by the COP on IFB coordination and cooperation. So we note those are live issues in other fora, but for now we are content with the addition of Section 3 bis. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Norway, I am still not confident singing. However, if my memory serves me correctly, kia ora might work as a greeting.
Thank you. You're not quite there yet. But fine. On Rule 6, I believe Norway has been really clear already. Like others, we believe that this is an agreement which is built on and is dependent on the input from observers to have the most full and comprehensive basis for our future decisions and measures. That is how we design the agreement, with transparency at its core. So we cannot support any rule which is unduly restrictive per the agreement, which is exactly what we think both options 2 and 3 are, unduly restrictive. And that is also why we don't support the non-objection procedure. So consequently, we prefer option 1 without 1 bis. And on the topic of cooperation, Norway was among the states that proposed 8 bis alt and 8 bis ter in Section 3 bis. And how we view this is really as a procedural hook for the provisions of the agreement on IFBs in the rules of procedure, but of course agreeing with other countries that have spoken that this will be pending the discussions we have on cooperation and the decision, and we can certainly see the interplay there. So this is really an important signpost and a placeholder for those important rules. Thank you.
Tak, Norway, and the phrase "you're not quite there yet" may be applied to my entire chairing, but I will leave that for others to judge. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and good morning, colleagues. India believes that the Conference of Parties under the agreement functions in a transparent and inclusive manner while preserving its intergovernmental character and its decision-making authority. Having carefully considered the options, India supports option 3. This option provides a structured and balanced framework for observer participation. In our view, it clearly distinguishes between signatories, non-signatories, intergovernmental organizations, and non-governmental international organizations, while relying on established UN practices such as the ECOSOC consultative status and standing invitations from the General Assembly. This approach also ensures openness to a wide range of stakeholders while safeguarding the primacy of parties in decision making. Mr. Co-Chair, India is further of the view that this balance between inclusivity and intergovernmental integrity is essential for the effective functioning of the Conference of Parties. Thank you.
I thank India for your intervention and I give the floor to Australia. G'day.
Thank you, Chair. Australia agrees with the EU, Korea, Iceland, the Philippines, Switzerland, New Zealand, the UK, Norway and others in supporting working on the basis of option 1. As the EU and others have observed, the principle of transparency is critical to the effectiveness of this agreement, and observer participation is a key pillar of transparency. We are mindful of the obligations in the agreement relating to this, including the obligation in Article 48.4 that modalities for participation in the COP shall not be unduly restrictive. And as others have observed, there are some differing views in the room around what unduly restrictive means in practice. On this, we would agree with the analysis of New Zealand expressed in this session. And for us, the need for the restrictions entailed in options 2 and 3 is not apparent. We're, of course, continuing to listen to views, but considering the particular wording of the BBNJ agreement and the transparency provision we have there, which differs from other treaties and reflects the particular importance of transparency and participation in this context, we strongly support option 1. On Section 3 bis, proposed jointly by Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Norway and Iceland, I would simply echo Iceland and Norway's comments on this, as well as the helpful observations of Switzerland. IFBs, of course, have a particular role in the BBNJ agreement, and proposed Section 3 bis would recognise this. It would elaborate a little bit on what is required procedurally to bring them into the operation of the agreement practically. And of course, if that were accepted, it would probably be appropriate to have some consequential amendments to rules 6 and 7 to avoid duplication. I'll just close by noting that that proposed Section 3 bis does not in any way diminish the importance of also providing modalities for other observers that are not unduly restrictive. And I'll close there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. And I give the floor to Saudi Arabia.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Regarding Rule 6 observers, we cannot support option 1. However, we support option 2. As for Rule 8 bis, we believe that it is inadequate for this to be included in the rules of procedure of the COP, since the agreement has highlighted the way coordination and cooperation must be done, and there is a difference between both and consultations that are held. Coordination and cooperation are under the guidance of the COP. However, the second is done by the committees. Therefore, we cannot support what was included. As for the new text, Rule 8 bis alt, we think that it is more adequate. However, it duplicates what was provided for by the agreement, and therefore we do not support that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Shukran, Saudi Arabia, and I give the floor to Nicaragua to be followed by Oman and Chile.
Buenos días.
Very good morning. Since this is the first time we're taking the floor, we wish to extend the warmest regard to the delegation of Nicaragua, to the co-chairs, and to their team for all of the work that they've been engaging in throughout this process. Thank you. In our national capacity, we would like to lay out our position as to Section 3 of Rule 6. Nicaragua is an ocean state with clearly delimited maritime boundaries by the International Court of Justice, and we're respectful of international legal frameworks and different laws and frameworks. Throughout the negotiation process for this agreement, for the BBNJ agreement, we have insisted on the respect for the norms established in the Convention and those laid down in the General Assembly resolution that stipulates the whole working process towards the agreement, the BBNJ agreement. When it comes to Rule 6, Nicaragua clearly expresses its full disagreement with the provision established in the draft Rules of Procedure that seeks to establish for non-state parties a status of observer and for them to have to request to receive an invitation from the COP or from its subsidiary bodies. We believe that this is an arbitrary and discriminatory and exclusionary decision that is contrary to the provisions established both in the United Nations Charter as well as those laid down in the Convention on Customary International Law. The BBNJ is established within the framework of provisions of the United Nations. We do not accept a group of states under this agreement or the bodies established under the BBNJ agreement deciding on the participation of a state. We do not believe that it is acceptable for the states who have freely decided to become party to the UN Convention to have the right to participate in the discussions and the decisions on the high seas. They should all have the right to do this. Nobody has, whether it's an independent state or a group of states, to appropriate sovereignty over the high sea, because the high seas are the common heritage of humanity. And this is enshrined within the Framework Convention as well as within the BBNJ. So all coastal states, all landlocked states have the same right to the high seas, the same right to navigation, to fisheries, to flying over them. All states know what the convention establishes. And we are not against, ladies and gentlemen, the participation of observers. On the contrary, we believe that it is important to have transparency when it comes to all of the developments of the work of the COP. And we believe that it is extremely important to establish cooperation agreements with specialized agencies who can contribute to the effective implementation of the agreement under the cooperation rules without undermining their competencies. However, it is important to establish a clear distinction between states and international organizations and non-governmental organizations, NGOs. We cannot have the same provisions for those. We request, just like our distinguished colleague from the Republic of El Salvador requested, some clarification on this and some clear drafting on this extremely important matter. Furthermore, we would request that in the discussions that take place on this issue, that we engage in them, ensuring an interpretation that guarantees equal conditions for all parties. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Nicaragua, and I give the floor to Oman to be followed by Chile.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. My country's delegation wishes to highlight the importance of this rule on observers, as it is of utmost importance in ensuring transparency and inclusiveness in the work of the COP. We consider that option 3 is a balanced approach, as it guarantees the identification of the various categories, signatories, non-signatories, international, non-governmental organizations, as well as scientific organizations. And the rights of each and every category are highlighted and identified so as to ensure transparency and a practical framework for the application of rules. We support the non-objection procedure in certain or under certain conditions so as to ensure consensus and flexibility under certain circumstances and so as to guarantee participation. The Secretariat must, in fact, be able to consider the requests submitted in this regard for participation. As for accreditation, we notice that upon the request of the chair has been highlighted repetitively in the rules of procedure. Third, as for Rule 8, observers must in fact be able to participate in formal meetings and take the floor under an invitation by the chair based on or by the president based on procedures adopted in all UN fora. They must be able to provide their contributions, including technical insights to support meetings. We also support the proposal of Iran, namely on ensuring the participation in all necessary languages. In conclusion, we stress that our main goal is ensuring coherence and transparency and inclusiveness. The participation of observers brings an additional value to the work of the COP so that we are able to ensure the implementation of the agreement. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Shukran, Oman, and I give the floor to Chile.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Good morning to all of our colleagues. We'd like to join our voice with those of delegations who underscored the importance of benefiting from the input and participation of observers in this process. And Article 47 of the agreement very clearly outlines this, and we think it's very important to not redraft what is indicated in the agreement and act as a consequence of what is laid down in the agreement and bring in rules of procedure that are consistent with the provisions of the agreement. From this point of view, in our national capacity, we can say that we believe that none of the three options is perfect. We would be inclined to work more on the basis of option 1. However, in option 1 itself, there is a provision that we believe is not appropriate, and that is the consideration of states that are not party to the agreement, their participation as a group of observers without distinction from the other observers. We believe that the vocation of the BBNJ agreement should be to achieve universal membership, and as a result, we must facilitate the participation of states that are not party so that they can participate as observers in the debates. And of course, this will be limited to decision-making. They won't be able to do that. To get those states on board, those that are in the process, but those that are not yet party to the agreement. Having said that, and listening to the debate this morning, it's clear that there is no consensus on some issues, and we believe that it should be important to think about some intersessional work. I think we can do that. Here, Co-Chair, we'd like to also request some clarity on the different expectations there are for intersessional work that would be engaged in to help us to overcome these issues. And my last point on the discussion on observers, of course, this is not a new issue. There are many observers, rather many examples, I mean, in the UN system, and several of these have been mentioned during these discussions. And I'd just like to mention that in Latin America, we have a specific treaty on the participation of observers for environmental issues. That's the Escazú Agreement that Chile and Costa Rica had the honor of co-leading together. And I think it's important to mention this, first of all, because the Escazú Agreement is based in principle on the Rio Declaration of the UN on the environment and development. However, the Escazú Agreement is also a UN agreement. The depository of this is the Secretary General. It's deposited with the Secretary General, and there are participation mechanisms that are not exactly the same as the three options we have here. They have participation of civil society in the Escazú Agreement. That's regulated. It recognizes some limits to that. For example, if observers sign up in large quantities, and that there might not be rooms that can accommodate all of them. So the Escazú Agreement establishes systems for representation where observers have to elect representatives. And while there might not be a non-objection criteria, there is some wording in the agreement on how to ensure this effective participation that is in line with the final goals of the agreement. So we would like to wrap up by underscoring that we believe that some intersessional work would be beneficial. We think that the solution to this discussion is not contained in any of the three options, actually. And in light of that, we will need a bit more time, and we will need to reflect a bit more and reach an understanding together on what concerns remain, and then look at how to approach these concerns. Probably behind some of these concerns, there are considerations that don't have much to do with the implementation of the agreement, but rather have to do with some political concerns of a political nature. And we believe that some sincere and honest discussions during the intersessional period could help us in this regard. I'll leave it there, Co-Chair. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Chile, muchas gracias, to provide a partial answer to your question. Following the conclusion of this session, I'll obviously have a chance to talk to my fellow co-chair on the next steps on a range of issues that are currently being discussed. With regard to the rules of procedure, we have already envisaged that there will be intersessional work with a further iteration of this draft to be produced for consideration at PrepCom 3. I would envisage that we will have something more precise to say about that this afternoon after these proceedings are over. I think it is fair to say, to agree with your comment, if you like, and as I think I've said before, we have a poll, we have a range of views running from those that are very accommodating of observers to those who are less accommodating of observers. In other words, this is not a binary issue. There are gradations, and there will be a question of us collectively coming to a balance that is capable of attracting consensus. In other words, to state the obvious, no one is going to get everything that they want. I don't think any of the versions before us will appear exactly as the final text, but there'll be a process of determining where the balance lies. I hope that's of assistance. I will now pass the floor to second round interventions, being by Micronesia for PCIDS and the Russian Federation. Respectfully, I ask that these be brief and very focused on issues that have emerged in this debate. I thank you. PSIDS, well, Micronesia for PSIDS, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Co-Chair. And it's actually in reference to something that I omitted in the first round. I just wanted to make the point that so far we're basically talking about the admission of observers that are new. If we look around the room, we have a lot of observers that have gone through the process, that have been vetted, etc. It is our hope that they don't have to do that a second time around, and that we find a practical way of bringing them from one process into the next. I thank you.
Thank you, Federated States of Micronesia for PSIDS. Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Благодарю, господин председатель.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I also wanted to draw your attention to the fact that indeed in Article 6, we're talking about and we're referring to the International Court of Justice. In the footnote, we don't know exactly how this quasi-structure is linked to international law, in particular international law of the sea. The International Court of Justice is suffering from corruption, double standards, and is a political puppet. And so therefore doesn't have the right to participate in any meeting anywhere. Its reputation is being undermined, it's violated its own Rome Statute as well. Thank you. I just wanted to talk about this issue. Sorry, I'm talking about the International Criminal Court here. And I hope you'll give me the floor for the next part within the framework of this discussion. And I just wanted to also raise the matter of the adoption of decisions by consensus and the importance of this matter. If you don't give me the floor, I will try and take the floor at the appropriate moments. Thank you.
I thank the Russian Federation. I now turn to observers. I would note that I have 5 inscribed, and I ask again that they be disciplined and avoid repetition. UNODC, you have the floor, to be followed by IUCN. Okay, I'm giving the floor now to IUCN.
Thank you, Co-Chair, for giving us the floor. On Part 3, Rules 6 and 7, IUCN would like to make the following points. As an international organization with a unique membership that includes governments, non-governmental organizations, and indigenous peoples organizations as members, IUCN represents a broad and diverse constituency with relevant expertise. Through this role, IUCN has and will continue to substantively contribute to the work of this process, including through capacity building, technical support to states, and mobilizing expertise across science, policy, and practice. In this regard, our delegation joins other delegations, namely the EU, PSIDS, Republic of Korea, Philippines, Iceland, Switzerland, New Zealand, UK, Norway, Australia, and Chile, to work from option 1, ensuring meaningful observer participation. However, we encourage parties to align with established practice under other Rio conventions and draw attention to the UNFCCC's formulation, which provides that any body or agency, whether national or international, governmental or non-governmental, which is qualified in the matters covered by the convention and which has informed the Secretariat of its wish to be represented at a session of the Conference of the Parties. In addition, we strongly support an inclusion of a reference to the right of observers to participate in intersessional work. we would advise against taking a too prescriptive approach to listing the types of organizations who can become observers and what activities they can do. Again, drawing on the language of UNFCCC. As such, we would ask for the deletion of one alt and use of one as a basis, but change the language from with an interest in to which is qualified in. We would also suggest the deletion of paragraph 2 in option 1 in its entirety, but ask for the retention of 2 bis. We believe this approach balances inclusivity, transparency, and party oversight, while safeguarding the vital contributions observers make to the success of this process. Thank you, Chair.
I thank you, and I give the floor to Jamaica speaking on behalf of CARICOM. My apologies, we seem to have a system error up here. It didn't emerge, so we're checking now with the technical people, but Jamaica for CARICOM, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Facilitator. We'll address our concerns in the reverse order. So concerning Rule 8 bis, we agree that the words and to ensure and not to undermine do not accurately reflect the provisions of the agreement and should be deleted. We also agree that the role of IFBs in the rules of procedure should be considered in the light of the output of the working group on IFBs. CARICOM therefore considers that Rule 8 bis alt and Rule 8 bis ter can be retained pending the final decision on this matter. So returning to Rule 6, we have previously expressed a preference for option 1. And as the representatives of the European Union have so clearly stated, along with the representatives of New Zealand, Australia, among many others, it's our view that this option most clearly implements the requirements for transparency as set out in Article 48 of the agreement. We have noted the various opinions that have been expressed today, but we remain convinced that an interpretation that supports the widest participation best serves the interest of the agreement and state parties thereto. Thank you.
I thank Jamaica speaking on behalf of CARICOM, and I again apologise for what are clearly system errors in terms of the technology here, and I give the floor to the High Seas Alliance. High Seas Alliance, you have the floor. Sound engineers, High Seas Alliance, the floor. NGO 15.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and good morning, delegates. I am delivering this intervention on behalf of the High Seas Alliance, and further to your request, you can consider it as a consolidated intervention of our 77 member organizations. Firstly, we congratulate St. Kitts and Nevis for the ratification, and that is indeed an exciting news. We thank the many delegations for their support of transparency and observer participation and option 1. It will come as no surprise that we strongly recommend that the PrepCom adopts option 1. Options 2 and 3 could prevent the participation of one or all observers if one country objects. They would contravene Article 48, Paragraph 4 of the BBNJ agreement, which requires that COP rules of procedure for observer participation shall not be unduly restrictive. Also, options 2 and 3 would prevent observers from fully participating because neither option allows for NGO observers to submit their views in writing to the conference. And for those who are mindful of the ISA procedures, let us remember these were finally adopted in 1995, 30 years ago. I was around 5 years old back then. They are many decades old, and the world has moved on since these were negotiated. We do have a suggestion for option 1. Under Rule 7, in paragraph 2, should add to the second appearance of the words in the SHAFO, conference of the parties, the words, and its subsidiary bodies, so that the observer status covers both the COP and subsidiary bodies. Finally, on 8 bis, we intervened on this yesterday, so we won't repeat our intervention, but we urge that this matter is already governed by the agreement and its careful balance and is substantive, and we agree with Clam and Iran that it should be deleted. Thank you, Co-Chair.
I thank you, the High Seas Alliance, very much. I appreciate that the International Seabed Authority has requested the floor. I ask that this be very quick and focused, please. You have the floor, and that will be the last intervention I take from observers. We must move on to part 9.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Actually, my comment is related to Part 9, Rule 39, decisions on competent, but also related to the participation of relevant FBs in the BBNJ processes. I say Secretariat understand that the Conference of the Parties can take decisions on the competence of the Conference of the Parties. What concerns us is one related issue on the competencies of relevant FBs. Article 5 of the BBNJ agreement defines the relationship between this agreement and the convention and the relevant FBs. Article 22, paragraph 2 further emphasizes such relationship and establishment of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas. Paragraph 2 of Article 22 provides that in taking decisions under this article, the Conference of the Parties shall respect the competencies of and not undermine relevant FBs. To respect the competencies of relevant FBs and not to undermine them constitutes a legal obligation for the Conference of the Parties when considering decisions, including on establishing ABMTs. In our understanding, the issue of the scope of competencies of relevant FBs and whether relevant FBs could be undermined by potential BBNJ measures is not subject to decision by the Conference of the Parties. The Conference of the Parties can make decisions on the scope of its own competence, but not other FBs, no matter directly or indirectly. The scope of the competencies of relevant FBs and whether they could be undermined should be elaborated by relevant FBs in question. The Conference of the Parties should listen to the views of relevant FBs in this regard. We appreciate the wide support for observer status for SA and relevant FBs. However, observer status and envisaged regular consultations are just part of the whole processes. The proper implementation of Article 5 and Article 22, particularly paragraph 2, needs meaningful involvement of relevant FBs and corresponding procedural rules, apart from observer status and regular consultations. It is advisable to formulate relevant procedural rules in this respect. Thanks, Co-Chair.
I thank the ISA. I note that Indonesia has inscribed to speak. Is it on part 9 to which we now turn, or are you intending to come in on part 4 to which we have been discussing? Well, in fact, I will move to part 9, but if Indonesia wishes to intervene under part 4, please feel free to do so as part of your intervention. So we will now move, and I will give you the floor first if that is the case. We will now move to part 9 of the Rules of Procedure, the conduct of business. I just want to make it clear I am opening the floor up for the entirety of part 9. That is from Rule 33 up to and including Rule 43. The floor is now open, but I will give the floor to Indonesia first. But the floor is now open for part 9 Rule 33 up to and including Rule 43. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Yes, for the previous section, Mr. Co-Chair. So, very brief. Indonesia would like to suggest that the Section 3 observer to have a similar language to the established practice to other multilateral environmental agreements. Indonesia also want to express the approach that the observers shall be on the invitations and approval basis by the complaints of the parties or for considerations. Indonesia highlight the Rule 6 and Rule 7 of the rules of the procedures of the COP of CBD provide more simplified language and its operation. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Terima kasih, Indonesia. We now move conclusively to part 9 of the Rules of Procedure, and I see that Morocco has requested to take the floor, speaking on behalf of the Africa Group. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. On part 9, Conduct of Business, Rule 38, the African Group supports the principle that sessions of the Conference of the Parties and its subsidiary bodies should, as a rule, be held in public. We recognize that in exceptional and limited circumstances, it may be necessary to close a session to observer. In such cases, the decision should be clearly justified, taken by a majority and time-bound. On Rule 34, the African Group considers quorum as an essential safeguard for the legitimacy of our process. We therefore support maintaining a 2/3 quorum for decision-making to ensure that decisions are representative. For the opening of meetings, we see merit in a simple majority as an appropriate threshold, while reserving flexibility to hear from colleagues. We are aware that some delegations have expressed concerns over the 2/3 requirement. However, for our group, a high threshold remains important to guarantee the credibility and inclusiveness of the decisions of the COP. We support ensuring clarity on how REIOs are counted towards quorum to safeguard sovereign equality and avoid inflating participation. We would be inclined towards a formulation that ties quorum to the number of REIO member states that are parties and present at the time of decision making, as this most faithfully reflects actual participation. At the same time, we are open to reflecting further and will carefully listen to the perspectives expressed in the room. On Rule 36, the African Group supports the principle that representatives of parties shall take precedence over observers when it comes to speaking. Within observers, we favor the order reflected in the bracketed language. Observer states should take precedence over IGOs, which in turn should take precedence on NGOs and other stakeholders. We also note that the word normally following shall may be unnecessary and could create ambiguity, given that shall already establish the imperative. Overall, we consider the text acceptable as it reflects established UN practice, with small refinements noted above. On Rule 38 bis, the African Group supports the inclusion of a right of reply, as this reflects standard UN practice. We trust, however, that this provision will be used with restraint and not lead to very prolonged exchanges. We therefore consider the current drafting acceptable. And I thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Morocco, on behalf of the Africa Group, and I give the floor to the European Union. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. On Rule 33, the EU and its member states support the principle of openness in the operation of the governance bodies of the BBNJ agreement. However, we do acknowledge that there may be rare occasions when closed meetings may need to take place. In respect of Rule 33.1, we would prefer to limit the application of this rule to the Conference of the Parties, with a separate rule in the subsidiary bodies' terms of reference or modalities to address when they can meet in closed session. Regarding Rule 33.1, we agree with the additional text for the requirement for a majority threshold to move to a closed session, and we agree that closed sessions should be time-bound. However, we consider that the language on exceptional circumstances may need to be tightened or clarified, so we're reserving on the rule until the language is cleaned up a little. Regarding paragraph 2 of Rule 33, We again agree with the principle behind the proposed new language and believe it's a good basis for further consideration of the modalities relating to closed sessions. But again, we're reserving on the exact language until we consider it in more detail and are interested in the views of other delegations. As regards Rule 34 on quorum, in part 1, we support the majority, 1/3 of parties to open the debate and the presence of a majority for decision-making. And in respect of Rule 2, this rule is explicitly linked to the decision-making discussion we had yesterday in relation to REOs. The proposed new text for calculating the quorum, starting with on the basis of, this does not take into account the specificities of the EU's legal order, and it has no basis in the text of the agreement. We stress again that the terms of the agreement should be strictly reflected in the rules of procedure, and therefore this rule should end after the reference to Article 64 of the agreement. As regard Rule 36, we think that flexibility can be useful when it comes to the order of speakers, and so we support the inclusion of the word normally in part 1. We think that there are occasions when observers or representatives of IFBs might usefully be able to contribute to the debate ahead of states parties, so we think that it provides a good flexibility for the chairs. As regards Rule 38 bis on the list of speakers, we're reserving our position on this pending justification from the proposer of the rule. And then turning to Rule 39 bis, the EU and its member states oppose the new wording related to Article 18 of the agreement. We do not consider that the additional language is necessary to operationalise Article 18. In the first instance, we note that paragraph 1 simply restates and repeats the text of the agreement. Therefore, this is redundant language, and we do not consider it necessary or appropriate for inclusion in the rules of procedure. As regards paragraph 2, in our view, the text of part 3 of the agreement on ABMTs must be considered holistically. Part 3 of the agreement represents the balance that was reached in the negotiation of the agreement. It contains a carefully designed safeguards that were drafted to address the concerns on proposed ABMTs that Rule 39 bis and bis alt, I note, appears to selectively give effect to. The balance in Part 3 of the agreement includes provision for consultation and notification procedures regarding proposed ABMTs, as well as enabling preliminary reviews and facilitating broad assessment of proposed ABMTs. In addition, respect for sovereignty is emphasized throughout the agreement. Moreover, we note that the scientific and technical body and the Conference of the Parties themselves have the ability to modify any proposed ABMT if concerns arise during the aforementioned procedures that the proposed ABMT may infringe upon the sovereign rights or jurisdiction of any state. We are also concerned that Rule 39 bis and bis alt is an attempt to reopen negotiations on these issues that have been resolved by the careful formulation of the agreement's provisions. An additional concern we have regarding Rule 39 bis is that it risks undermining the entire architecture of the agreement on ABMTs, as it would create a veto right for any party to the agreement to simply oppose an ABMT proposal through the suggested notification procedure. Therefore, we cannot support the suggested new text in relation to 39 bis or 39 bis alt. On Rule 40, we would just be open to hearing what the justification is for the proposed new language in square brackets at the start of the paragraph. And that is it, Mr. Co-Chair, on Section 9 for the EU and its member states.
I thank the European Union for your intervention, and I give the floor to Argentina speaking on behalf of CLAM.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. We're making this statement on behalf of CLAM. As pertains to Rule 33, we support the changes that were introduced that regulate the possibility of having closed sessions, both at the COP as well as in its subsidiary bodies. as pertains Rule 34, the first paragraph, we would like to state that it supports a majority of parties that would be the amount needed to adopt a decision. As to paragraph 2 of Rule 34, Clem understands that for the determination of a quorum in the case of a regional organisation of economic integration, this would be taken into account on the basis of the number of member states of said organisation that are duly accredited and present at the moment of determining the quorum. In this regard, we support the drafting contained in the second set of square brackets. On Rule 36, in line with what the African group expressed, we are also not in agreement with the inclusion of the word normally, because this could be interpreted in the sense that in some cases observers could take precedence over the parties. However, we could support the rest of the additions contained in the final part of this rule. Moving on to Rule 38 bis on right of reply, we believe that it is relevant to include this following international practice in this regard. And finally, when it comes to Article 38 bis, paragraph 4, while we are flexible, we would simply suggest that we replace the expressions he or she with the president in order to achieve consistency in the use of the terminology in this rule and in terms of technical legislative practice. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Argentina. For some reason, I just can't see Singapore today. I don't know if my good friend from Iraq is sitting taller or Nathaniel's bending down. I can see him now. So it is indeed Singapore on behalf of AOSIS. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. On Rule 33, AOSIS would highlight that the language in paragraph 1 relating to subsidiary bodies would overlap with what is provided for in Rule 27.2. Observer participation is also addressed in an earlier part of the rules and we feel should not be addressed here. In relation to paragraph 2 of Rule 33, we feel this rule is unnecessary. The practice is for all decisions to be made public. And in these rules, at least this set of rules, there's no rule that provides for decisions to be kept private or something akin to being under seal. Turning to Rule 39, AOSIS would welcome views on whether a decision on competence should be considered a procedural or substantive matter and whether this is something that should be expressly reflected in the rules of procedure. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Singapore, on behalf of IOSIS, on behalf of the co-chair. And again, on behalf of the co-chair, I now give the floor to the Federated States of Micronesia on behalf of the PSIDS. Have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. And of course, we will align ourselves with the points that AOSIS has just made. Now, on the first one, on Rule 33, and as AOSIS stated, there might be better placement for this one. Yes, our feeling is, yeah, meetings should be open. If we as states parties take a decision that we want to have privacy, and I don't expect that to happen very often, but if we do, then I think that should also be respected, and that would be by a majority, an affirmative decision of the majority saying like, we would like the meeting to continue private. And that of course does not apply to decisions. If you decide something and you don't tell anyone about it, then there is not much point in that in Rule 2. On quorum in 34, we would shadow what the EU had said. Let's, when it comes to making a decision, then we would prefer the rules as drafted in the General Assembly, where it's a simple majority that's required. The main reason behind that is the experiences that we have seen both in SPLOS as well as in ISA, where we never actually reach quorum, and we don't want to lock ourselves out of our own decision-making process. Continuing on, 30. On Rule 36, yeah, we would envision that the parties would be speaking first. Then the next batch would be the ones that are eligible to become parties, like states that have, whether they have signed or whether they have not signed, but are the ones that that could join us, and then we would go into the rest afterwards. And I'm not providing any actual textual proposal, but that's how we would like to see that reflected. Going down, 38 bis, yes, we're comfortable with the right of reply. If we see that being exercised, and it's good that it's limited to 2. But yes, if someone was to badmouth Micronesia, then we would certainly like to reply to that, even though it's at the end of the meeting when everyone has left. The other ones in 38, we don't really have much to say. On 39, a decision on competence, we're comfortable with that rule. It's pretty standard. It's not being exercised very often. In 30 years at the UN, I've literally seen it just once. But basically what it is it's one form of a no action motion. So that is a procedural question which should be dealt with by a simple majority. 39 bis, I would tend to agree with the EU on this one. That is already in the agreement. Not sure if that gives us much benefit in including it here. Rule 40, except as otherwise provided in the agreement. We're not sure exactly to what kind of case that would pertain to. And it says shall normally be introduced in writing. And then there is exceptions to that anyway. So on 41, no, that's all we had for now. Thank you very much, Co-Chair.
I thank the Federated States of Micronesia speaking for PSIDS. We now move on to individual states. Can I please ask, for the purposes of time management, that anyone who is intending to speak who hasn't already inscribed on this item, please do so. And with that, I give the floor to Vietnam, to be followed by China, the Russian Federation, Iran, and the Philippines. Vietnam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, for giving me the floor. I have on comment on the rules 39 bis. So we are of the views that we do not need this rule because number one, the paragraph 1 simply repeats Article 18, which is not suitable and necessary for the document like the rules of procedure. And number 2, according to the language of paragraph 2, there would be a case when a party can block the consideration of the COP regarding the proposal on the ABMT establishment by just sending a notification to the Secretariat. So I think for the sake of the better discussion of the draft ROP, we'd better remove the rule 39 bis. And we reserve to come back to this matter depending on the updated text of the ROP. Thank you.
Khao Mun, Vietnam. I now give the floor to China. You have the floor.
谢谢共同主席。关于第39条之2。
Thank you, Co-Chair. Regarding Rule 39 bis and its application of Article 18, we have a proposed text. I would like to make some explanation regarding the different versions of the proposed text. At present, the text included by the Secretariat in the draft rules of procedure circulated on August 25th, namely the version with 2 paragraphs, was submitted by China last week. Subsequently, based on the views expressed by all parties during the discussions and our communication with some delegations, China submitted a new text this Wednesday. And on August 27th, it was uploaded to the PrepCom website. Both versions of the text remain valid. China requests that the Secretariat put the next 2 versions we submitted as option 1 and 2 successively when issuing the next update of the draft rules of procedure to facilitate the PrepCom's advancement of relevant consultations. Co-Chair, China has updated the proposed text for Article 39 bis in a constructive and cooperative spirit, namely option 2. To sum up, the new text can be summed up as 1 para, 2 sentences, and 3 elements. Element 1 is the initiation procedure for applying Article 18 of the agreement contained in the first sentence of the new text. Element 2 is the implementation and operationalization of applying Article 18 contained in the first half of the second sentence of the new text. Element 3 is the follow-up mechanism for applying Article 18 contained in the second half of the second sentence of the new text. Now, I would like to make a brief introduction to each element. Regarding element 1, the initiation procedure, according to our text, when a proposal to establish an BMT is submitted, if the geographical area covered by the proposal includes maritime areas within the jurisdiction of a state or involve the sovereignty, sovereign rights, or jurisdiction claimed by a state, that coastal state has the right to submit a written document to the Secretariat invoking the provisions of the Article 18 of the BBNJ agreement to express its objection. And this is in line with the spirit and words of the agreement. Because the scope of the application is strictly limited to the high seas and the international seabed area and cannot extend to any maritime areas under national jurisdiction. This constitutes a fundamental consensus reached by all parties when concluding the BBNJ agreement, explicitly enshrined in Articles 1, 3, 18, and other provisions of the agreement. Therefore, it has to be strictly abided by, otherwise it would contravene the agreement's purposes and objectives. We have heard the views of some delegations whether this kind of provisions would give the right to some states to prevent a BMT. And we don't agree with the prevention or blocking, because this is to rectify mistakes and errors. If it is a legitimate proposal to set up a BMT, there's no issue. If the proposal of the ABMT erroneously intervenes in the maritime territories of a country, then we need to apply Article 18. Here, I would like to stress that in light of the views expressed by some delegations regarding preventing abuse, China has explicitly stipulated in the first sentence of the new text that when the coastal state submit a written document, it should specifically indicate or clearly indicate the relevance of their objections to Article 18 of the agreement, ensuring that such objections are based on the infringement of their own national jurisdiction rather than that of other states. In other words, in accordance with our new text, a Pacific coastal state cannot invoke Article 18 of the agreement to object to the establishment of an ABMT in the Atlantic Ocean. Similarly, a protected area planned for the Arctic Ocean cannot be subject to objections invoking Article 18 from the Indian Ocean coastal states. Therefore, we must both safeguard coastal states' rights to defend their jurisdictional waters and prevent area-based management tools established under the agreement's framework from being unreasonably challenged. China's text reflects this balance. Therefore, it is in line with the spirit and the letters of the agreement. Regarding element 2, implementation and operationalization. According to our text, after a coastal state raises an objection to a proposal for ABMT, in accordance with relevant requirements, the COP should not decide on such a proposal. This expression originates from the wording from Article 18, namely, shall not consider for decision, quote and unquote. This expression is also from when the conclusion of the BBNJ, Ms. Reina Lee, then chair of the IGC, she expressed an understanding. The understanding is like this. I quote in English.
In relation to Article 18, entitled Area for Application in Part 3, the understanding was that the phrase, the conference of the parties shall not consider for decision, means that the conference of the parties can look at a proposal, but shall not decide on such proposals. End of the quote.
The understanding I just cited regarding Article 18 of the agreement was not only read out by the chair on the evening of March 4th, 2023, but was also reaffirmed by the chair when the agreement was formally adopted by the Intergovernmental Conference on June 19th, 2023. The relevant content is contained in paragraphs 19b and 27a of the report of the 5th session of the Intergovernmental Conference. The meeting report was adopted by consensus by the Intergovernmental meeting on June 20th, 2023. The document symbol is A/CONF.232/2023/5, which is available on the Secretariat's website. Regarding element 3, the follow-up mechanism, according to the Chinese draft text, although the COP should not decide on a proposal after a coastal state has submitted a written objection. However, we propose that such written objections may be withdrawn by the coastal state that submitted them. Once a written objection is withdrawn, for instance, if the proposing state modifies the geographical scope of the proposal for an ABMT, or if the coastal state and the proposing state, through consultations, ensure the proposal no longer applies to the coastal state's jurisdictional water, work on the proposal for the area-based management tool shall proceed according to the steps set forth in the agreement. I would like to clarify that. Article 18 of the agreement doesn't provide for a follow-up mechanism. However, during bilateral consultations, some delegations have proposed such a mechanism, which we consider to be reasonable. Therefore, we incorporated such a proposal in our new text. To sum up, based on our careful consideration, understanding, and assimilation of the views and suggestions put forward by the relevant delegations, China has proposed a new text and provided the relevant rationale. We hope that relevant delegations would join China, display constructive spirit, and in the spirit of cooperation, we will reach consensus on the rules of procedure. Co-chair. Regarding Rule 34 quorum in subpara 2, we support the last version in the parentheses, namely when counting the votes of the Regional Economic Commission, integrated organization, two factors should be considered. One is the members should have become the BBNJ parties. Secondly, the members should be present at the meeting. Therefore, those two factors should be present without both of the elements have to be there. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, China. I now will give all delegations a state of play. I requested about 25 minutes ago that anyone intending to speak, please inscribe on this item. So my speaking list is Russian Federation, Iran, Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, and Argentina. I would like to take everyone who wants to speak on this item, give them the opportunity to speak. So I ask all delegations to be disciplined in your interventions. We must finish at 1. Maybe I can extract another 5 minutes out of the interpretation. We will see. Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I fully agree with the colleague who spoke before me, who indicated the importance of maintaining the inviolable standard, the norm of the Convention on the Law of the Sea and the regime created under it. That's because it contains a critical norm, the UN norm of the freedom of the high seas, which is a matter of international customary law. This pertains to the interests of absolutely all states. Thus, a crucial mechanism to preserve the system that has already become established under the Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is already trusted by states as a international competent organization. That fact should be reflected in the rules of procedure based on which the rules of our conference will be governed. This pertains to the interests not only of states, but the basic human rights as well. One of the key goals of the UN is respect for human rights. Primarily, we're talking about the right to a decent life, which includes the right of every person to guarantee the ability to receive decent food, which is found in the benefits of the world's oceans. In that regard, one of the mechanisms for the preservation of this regime is found in decision-making. In the part of decision-making, in the part of the rules of procedure on decision-making, of course, decisions should be taken in accordance with the rules of procedure of the General Assembly and in accordance with the practice of the UN, specifically with SPLOS. But we want to point out again the importance of guaranteeing the preservation of all achievements, it's important to maintain consensus in accordance with the BBNJ. The parties will take every effort to adopt decisions by way of consensus. And para 17 of a UNGA resolution on the convening under UN auspices of intergovernmental organizations, the General Assembly said that the conference should, in good faith, undertake every effort to ensure that consent on matters of substance are achieved by consensus. Article 4 of the BBNJ says clearly that until the rules of procedure are adopted, then the rules of procedure of the aforementioned intergovernmental conference will take precedence. So there's a rule that the conference should strive in good faith to achieve, take decisions on substantive matters by consensus. The rule on decision making by consensus is broadly used in UN practice, starting in the 1960s and 1970s, and also in international conferences. Despite the fact that in the 1970 consensus was a novel method of decision making, there was a change to the UN charter, in essence, charter rather.
To those speakers who are inscribed to follow, I ask that you conclude your remarks in the next minute or two. You have the floor.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you. But frankly speaking, I wanted to stress the fact that this principle of consensus is found in UN practice. And of course, we need to ensure that all decisions of the conference, all decisions are taken by consensus. If even the General Assembly included a provision on that in its rules of procedure on the desirability of using consensus as a means of developing decisions and bringing states together, and to use that in its decision making. So that means it doesn't run counter to the principles of the Charter. So especially in that case, all of the decisions of this conference need to be made by consensus. Thank you. The priority, the UN Charter is of primary importance here. I thank you.
I thank the Russian Federation and I give the floor to Iran. Iran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. On Rule 33, we believe that the paragraph should stop after decide otherwise. On Rule 34, Paragraph 2, we believe that regional economic integration organization, when they're being considered for quorum, they should be counted to the extent of the number of member states of that regional economic integration organization that are party to the agreement, are duly accredited and present when counting and decision on quorum is taken. So we're inclined for the last proposal, but we need to add duly accredited as well, and when counting and decision on quorum is being taken. Rule 36, we support the changes made. We believe normally is not necessary. I mean, the term normally is not necessary in the first sentence. Rule 38 bis, we support. On Rule 40, the term except as otherwise provided in the agreement, I think that's not usual practice, the established practice regarding proposals and amendments that needs to be normally introduced in writing and so forth. They are standard language. It's better not to change this formulation. So for that reason, we suggest deletion of the term except as otherwise provided in the agreement. At the same time, we will be willing to hear from colleagues who believe that the agreement is actually conferring a different formulation upon the COP.
That's our comments for this section. We reserve our position on other parts. Thank you.
I thank you, Iran, and I give the floor to the Philippines. Sound engineers, the Philippines, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair. The Philippines wishes to provide the following comments and inputs on Section 9, Conduct of Business of the Rules of Procedure of the Conference of Parties. We'd like to begin with Rule 39. The Philippines would like to register again our position that 39 bis is unnecessary. The language of 39 bis in the refreshed ROP is superfluous. We recall our previous statement that the language in Article 18 is a delicate one, and the consensus on the agreement rests on, among other things, that carefully crafted balance. This proposal in Article 39 bis that we heard in the room today, meanwhile,
you.